And now I'd like to bring up our keynote speaker, Keith Berns from Green Cover Seed. We had a great session with him yesterday, and I'm excited to see what he has to say about being innovative in a status quo world.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, folks. When Lauren first asked me to come and do this, I was like, what's this group called? What do they do? Because I'm from Nebraska, so I'm not exactly familiar with what this is, but the more I've gotten to know what you folks do, the more I admire it and appreciate it. And it's exciting. It's exciting to see the potential in the room. It's exciting to see the potential that you've already launched into the ag economy. And it's exciting to think about what will come out of groups like this in future years. And so this afternoon, I want to just pose this question. Do you think that in our society today, are we more innovative now than we were 20 years ago? 40 years ago? 80 years ago? We could argue that question all day long, and the tendency, I think, is going to be for us to say, of course we are. Look at who's around us. And we're a little biased because everybody in this room is an innovator. You're here because you have that type of mindset. But as a general rule, as a society, I think that every generation, and especially this one, I think, there's always a drag to innovation. There's always things that are holding people back. Now, again, the people in this room, for the most part, are exceptions, both farmers and founders. But I want you to think, as I talk here this afternoon, about what I'm talking about, and not just apply it to yourselves, but be thinking about our economy, our society as a whole. And especially if you're a founder here, I want you to be thinking about how this applies to your potential customers. Because as you develop products and as you develop services to move out into the marketplace, you've also got to develop customers. And for some of your products, they are so innovative, they're so creative, they're so new, that your best customers are going to be the innovators as well. The innovators, the farmer innovators. And so as I talk about these concepts that I'm going to lay out here, I want you to be thinking about not only how it applies to yourself, but how it might apply to you developing a larger customer base, your target audience. What things can you do to help bring the innovation mindset to these folks as well? And so as we think about innovation, it's an exciting thing. I think that, again, many farmers are innovators just by nature, but some aren't. And that's okay. Not everybody needs to be an innovator. But again, all of you in this room most likely are. But as we think about innovation and, the ability to create new ideas, to create new products, to make change, it's always held back by some things. And I want to talk about 5 things that I think are tying innovation down and not releasing the potential of people. Again, I'm just looking at society. I'm looking at the people that I know. I'm looking at things in the bigger picture. But I see these 5 things holding innovation back. And if we really want to break through and become more innovative as an individual, as a team, as a marketplace, I think these are things that we need to look at and address. And so I'm going to go through what these 5 things are, and then we're going to go through how we can change these both in our own selves, within our teams, and then also within the customers that we want to reach. Because again, I think it's important to apply this mindset, to apply this concept to the people that we're trying to sell our products to. So, first one, I think the first tether, the first anchor that holds innovation back is, for a big part, I think as a country, we've kind of lost that pioneer spirit. I was thinking about this as I was sitting on my couch during the blizzard a couple weeks ago, and I was looking at this family history book that my mom put together. Now, don't tell her, but she spent hundreds of hours putting these things together, and I hadn't looked at it yet. I don't want to admit that to her because she spent a lot of time putting it together, but I started looking at it, and it was really interesting to look at my family history, and she had tracked it, way back to, people and that had immigrated from Germany and and fought in the Revolutionary War and all of these things. But as I looked at my generations, 3, 4 generations ago that had settled right there in Nebraska, it just dawned on me that those people were tough. And you've got ancestors and forefathers the same way. Those people were tough people. They had harsh environments. They had tough conditions they had to overcome. But that pioneer spirit drove them on, and it forced them to innovate. And, my grandfather passed away when I was like 12 or 13, but the memories I have of him, and it's much like my dad, they could fix anything. We have an old well drilling rig sitting out in our trees that he built just from a bunch of old Model T and Model A parts. These people were very innovative in the things that they did. And I'm not sure that we still have nearly as much of that in our society, our collective society, as what we used to. And so I think that's one thing that maybe holds us back, is that a lot of people just don't have that pioneer spirit, that desire to do new things. Number 2, I think we struggle against tradition. And I know this for a fact. When we go out and try to, talk to people about cover crops, it's like, well, I don't know. My dad didn't do that, so I'm not sure I should really be doing it. Tradition is a hard thing. Tradition is a hard thing. And I don't know how many of you have seen the musical Fiddler on the Roof. If you haven't seen it, it's a great show. It tells the story of this Jewish family in Ukraine in the early 1900s. And there's this really iconic song demonstrated here. It's called Tradition. And they talk about, these are the things that the papa has always done. And these are the things that the mama has always done. And these are the things that the son has always done. And these are the things that the daughter has always done. And it's very hard for them to change, because that's their tradition. That's what they're used to. That's what they grew up with. And it's hard to make a change. Now, it's a great show, and there are changes made throughout the course of it. I don't want to do a spoiler alert, but it's difficult to get people to break out of what they're used to doing. Grace Hopper was an incredibly intelligent woman. She was one of the pioneers of the computer industry. She helped develop some of the very early computers. She served in the Navy for many years. And I love this quote. She says, "Humans are allergic to change. They love to say, we've always done it that way." Okay, and you've all heard that, right? I try to fight that, she says, and that's why I have a clock on my wall that runs counterclockwise. When I read that, I thought, did she really? And so I did a little bit of looking up, and sure enough, she had a clock that ran backwards, because she just wanted people to think about doing things in different ways. And like I said, she was brilliant. She developed many of the components of what we now know as the personal computer. She was developing this back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s by thinking differently, by not going, we've never done it that way. She was thinking about how could we do it different. And so if we're going to get the customer base that we want, we have to help them break out of that tradition mindset and try something new. Because as long as they want to continue with the same way that they've always done it, there's no incentive for them to buy our new product or to try our new service. Number 3 is what I call the comfort crisis. Well, I don't call it the comfort crisis. It is a comfort crisis. I read this book a couple of years ago by Michael Easter. Someone had recommended it to me, and I read it, and it's like, you know how sometimes you read things that are a little too convicting, and you wished you hadn't read it, because now you got to decide: am I going to act on this? Am I going to do something with this new information? But in this book, he talks about how, and particularly in American culture, we're so addicted to being comfortable that we don't want to change. We don't want to do new things because we're addicted to this comfort. And I see it. I see it in this generation that's out there. We employ 60 people, so we're always hiring people, and it's hard to find people that want to work. Hard to find people that want to show up on time and be dependable and be reliable, because it's much easier to stay home on the couch or the lazy boy and play video games. And so, this book, he goes through this kind of this journey of self-discovery, and he does these hard things, including, much of the book is about this caribou hunt that he goes on in the Arctic Circle, and just all the hardships that he had to endure and the lessons that he learned from that. So it just got me thinking that, what is the cost of having, this addiction to comfort? Here's just a picture that came up when I was searching for the comfort crisis. But, we have a choice. Are we going to sit on the couch and eat potato chips and, play video games or watch sports or movies or whatever? Or are we going to get out and do something? Are we going to get out? Are we going to exercise? Are we going to enjoy the outdoors? Doesn't mean we have to always be working, but are we going to be outside? Are we going to be actively engaging our environment, or are we going to be a very passive person and let the environment act on us? The book goes on to say, here's some of the problems when we're addicted to comfort, anxiety, depression, chronic disease, obesity, digital media overdose, loneliness, loss of community. These are big problems in our society today. May not be in your particular circles, but as a society at large, we have this. And I think it also leads to a loss of innovation. Because how innovative can you be if you're just sitting on the couch watching TV, playing video games? So I think that this is an issue that we have to deal with. Maybe, again, not so much for the people in this room, but for the people that we want to be looking at our products. Number 4, I think, is a fundamental misunderstanding of the concept of risk versus reward. Now, again, as inventors, as farmers, we tend to understand that pretty well, risk versus reward, or at least we think we do. And it depends on the stage of life that you're in, how you look at that. But when we look at risk versus reward, it's like, okay, should I try it? Should I not? What's the benefit? What's the fallback of that? What if I fail? Do you focus more on the failure, or what if I succeed? Or do you look more at the fear and the anxiety part, or the opportunities and the potential? And so I think, again, that a lot of people that I see in our society around me, they tend to focus more on the failure part, and they're afraid of failing, and so then they don't try. And it's, I try to evaluate my own life and say, how often have I done that? And sometimes, that is true. Sometimes I'm afraid of failing, so I don't try. But that is something that we just need to be aware of. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, I read this quote. It says, given a 10% chance of 100 times payoff, you should take that bet every time. 10% chance of something succeeding. Most of us would say, I don't like those odds, I'm not going to do it. But if the payoff is 100x, he's saying you should take that bet every time. And here's where I read that. Some of you were here yesterday when Dan Schultz was doing his workshop. I read this in Dan's newsletter. And so if you haven't signed up for Dan's newsletter, I would encourage you to do that. You can go on to LinkedIn and find him, or other places. But just great information like that Dan's putting out that just kind of makes you think. Do I do that? Do people on my team do that? Or is my customers doing that? Is it too much of a risk? What's the risk versus the reward of somebody trying my product or engaging my service? Those are questions that we have to ask, because it's the questions that the farmers are asking as well. And so we have to address that, and we have to think about that. And then number 5, what I think really holds a lot of innovation back, it's the people who are currently benefiting from the systems that are in place already. They are always going to try to hold back innovation. They will always try to hold that innovation back. So if you're the king and you've got it all, what incentive is there for you to change? What incentive? In fact, it's a disincentive if things change, because you've got it pretty good right now and you don't want it to change. So you are the king of status quo and you don't want it to change. So some of you have probably seen The Godfather. The Godfather and other movies like this. When the mob is in control, they don't want things to change. In fact, they'll go to great lengths to keep the status quo because it's very lucrative to them. Now, I'm not comparing all the status quo to mobsters, but it's just an example of how people will do great lengths or do all kinds of things to try to keep the system the same if it's currently benefiting them. And those people will try to exert that influence over you and over me and over the industries that we want to break into. And so then you have people like this come along, and regardless of how you feel about their politics or what they're doing, you have to admit that they're disruptors. And they are out there and they are disrupting the status quo, not only now, but they've been lifelong disruptors of the systems that are. And they're trying to change it. Now, you may not like what they're trying to change it to, but it's obvious that they're wanting to affect change. And so in ag, we've got all these companies that are doing pretty well with the system the way it is. And so there's going to be a lot of pushback against us if we're trying to change the status quo, because these companies don't like that. They are saying, we're doing just fine, thank you, with the systems that are in place, so there's no incentive, or there's little incentive for us to change. They're going to have to be forced to come to those changes. And folks, we are the disruptors. Part of our job as innovators, part of your job as founders, inventors, is you have to go disrupt the systems that are in order to create systems that you want to be for an environment where your product or your service can be marketed and where people will buy it and where they'll want it. So it's up to us to disrupt these things and to shake these things up and to challenge the status quo. But the status quo will fight back and they will push back, and we just have to be ready for that. So we see this situation where innovation is largely held back by these 5 factors. And so as we look at these and we can start taking this apart, we can start saying, okay, what can we do with each one of these things to bring innovation back? Personally, within my team, within my community, within the target market of who I'm trying to sell to. And so what we need to do is we need to cut these tethers. We need to release the innovative spirit that we know can be there. We need to cut these tethers and start releasing that innovation. And so instead of the loss of the pioneer spirit, we need to reinstill that. We need to re-find the spirit of our forefathers and our foremothers that settled this land and endured great hardships to build what we have today. And how do we do that? Well, I think there's 3 things. As I was thinking about this, I kind of thought there's really 3 things that have to come together for that true pioneer. And the first one is a mindset. Pioneers had a mindset of they just weren't content with the way things were. They wanted something new. They wanted to be out on that frontier. They wanted to be pushing the boundaries. They wanted to see what was possible. And that's a mindset. You either have that or you don't. The ones that didn't, they stayed back east. They did other things, and that's fine. Not everybody needs to have that. We can't have everybody being a pioneer, but if you're going to be a pioneer and push into some of these areas, have that pioneer spirit, you have to have that mindset of what could it be? How much better could it be? And not just be satisfied with how it is right now. Number 2, I think you have to have vision. Because it's not enough to just say, well, I think it could be better, but not really having a clue of what that could be. You have to have a vision of what that looks like. And so the visionaries are the ones that have this concept, and then they're putting things into place to make that happen. Many of the people that were up here on stage, they're introducing themselves as the CEOs, but my guess is they're also the visionary of their company as well. Because often in a startup like that, the CEO is also the visionary. They had the vision of what this product could be. And then thirdly, and this is a big one, you got to have an incredible work ethic to be a pioneer. As I was looking through those books that my mom had put together, the amount of labor that those folks had to do to get anything done was incredible. And it's, to be a pioneer today, you still have to have that work ethic. Now, it may not be, 18 hours a day walking behind a horse pulling a plow. It's different kind of labor, but you still have to be willing to put the hours in. Because if you're not willing to put the hours in, you're not going to be a very good pioneer. You're not going to accomplish the things that you want to do. And so here's what we see. We see people that have the mindset and the vision, but they don't have the work ethic. And they're just kind of the dreamers. And you've all met them. They have great ideas, they want things to change, and they know where it should go, but they just want to talk about it and have someone else do it. They're not actually willing to put the hours in to do it. They're kind of the dreamers. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't make them bad people. They're just not these true pioneers that we need to be real innovators. And then if you have the mindset and the work ethic, but you lack the vision, you're just going to kind of wander around, and you're going to go from one project to the next, and I'm going to start this, and you'll probably never finish things because you don't have a vision of what it's going to look like in the end. It's going to be difficult for you to know how to get there. And then if you have the vision and the work ethic, but you don't have the right mindset, you're probably going to burn out because you know what you want to accomplish, and you just work, but you don't have the mental mindset of how to do that, how to balance things. You're probably going to burn yourself out. But the true pioneers have all three of those. And they come together in the center of that Venn diagram, and they've got that combination of mindset, vision, and work ethic. And I think that describes many of you in this room here today, but does it describe the people we're trying to reach? I don't know. What can we do to help them to get there, help them to get some of that pioneer spirit back? And I want to also just stress this point before I move on. A pioneer spirit is not the same as a mountain man. So, when we look back at the settling of this country, there were pioneers and there were mountain men. And the mountain men, by and large, they were lone wolves. They did things by themselves. They would be out in the wilderness, maybe them and their horse, and that's about it for months at a time. Very free spirits, very lone rangers. Whereas a pioneer, they were out there as well, but they did a lot of things in community. They worked together with family, with the other people in their community, because they knew they couldn't do it by themselves. And so I think as we develop companies, as we're trying to grow these companies, we need to make sure that we have the pioneer spirit and not a mountain man spirit, because it's going to be very difficult for you to do it alone. And simply the fact that you're at this and you're part of this group tells me that you're wanting the support of a community. And again, as I looked at these pictures of my ancestors and the work that they would have done with threshing and putting up hay and doing all of these things, you very rarely saw anybody working by themselves. Very rarely did you see them working by themselves. It was always in teams, it was always in groups, it was always in communities, and what a great thing. We are far more likely to do things independently and by ourselves now than what they used to do. And I don't think that's a good thing. We work with a lot of Amish in selling cover crop seed. The Amish are using a lot of these cover crop seed, and I love the approaches that they take. Now, they're hard to communicate with because you can't just send them a text or an email or call them anytime you want. But the sense of community that they have and the benefits that bring are really good, and it's something I'm just a little bit jealous of. Okay, number two, so we need to regain that pioneer spirit. Number two, we need to cut that tether of tradition, and we need to replace tradition with experimentation. We need to get people encouraged to try new things. That's how you break out of tradition, is try something new. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. Edison, of course, says, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways it won't work when he's developing the light bulb. And I love this, Gabe Brown is a good friend of mine, and I've heard Gabe say many times, if I did not have at least one thing that failed every year, then I knew I wasn't trying enough things. He wanted to fail at something every year, not because he enjoyed failure, but because it would show him that he was trying enough new things. Now, he wasn't trying it on 1,000 acres. He might have only been trying it on 10 acres, 20 acres. But if you're not failing at a few things, that probably means you're not trying at enough things. He went on to say experiments are always yield food for thought. So you can learn as much from the failures as you do from the successes. Now, in Nebraska, and I'm sure Iowa has something similar. In Nebraska, we have a really good, they call it the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network, where farmers can, and this is through the extension, UNL extension, but farmers can come together and they can say, I want to do an experiment or a trial with this product or this seed or this timing or spacing or whatever it is. And they get together, and there may be 3 or 4 of them that do the same experiment across, a similar geography. Sometimes it's different parts of the state. And then they all compare notes at the end of the year. They have this report, they have a meeting, and they share the notes, they share the protocols, so they're all doing very similar things, and they learn from each other. They encourage each other to experiment. They encourage each other to try new things. Hey, why don't you try this, I'll try this, and then we'll come back together, and now we'll have learned twice as much because we had 2 experiments instead of 1, but I only had to do 1 of them. And the other thing is, with the technology that we have in our cabs and at our fingertips, it is so much easier to do these types of experiments than it ever used to be. And so for a farmer who's not at least doing some sort of, variable rate trials with their fertility or seeding rates, when all it takes is pushing a few buttons and doing a little bit different rate or a little bit different trial, that's just low-hanging fruit. And so you as founders, you as people who are selling new products and new services, we need to encourage this spirit of experimentation and get them out of that concept of tradition. Well, I've never planted corn on a skip row, or I've never done a cover crop in between my corn rows, or I've never used a biological. We need to get them to try it. We need to get them to experiment in order for them to really innovate. Number 3, the comfort crisis. How do we address this comfort crisis that I think is a much bigger deal than what most of us realize, because you may not be plugged into that group. We're all hardworking people, but there's a lot of people out there that just want to be comfortable. So how do we address that? Well, I think it's by doing hard things. Doing hard things. And that sounds easy. And again, we don't even think about it. We just do hard things all the time. But how do we encourage others? And particularly, if you're a parent, how do you raise your children so they don't get stuck in this comfort crisis cycle? How do you work with your grandchildren so that they're not addicted to the video games and the couch, and you get them outside doing hard things? I read this book a couple of years ago, well, probably just last year. It's called Teddy and Booker T. It was a really good book about Teddy Roosevelt and Booker T. Washington. They were contemporaries. They did a lot of things in parallel. They did some things together. It was just a really interesting book about the influence that each of them had on the United States, on their particular communities, on the culture at the time. Really interesting read. But Teddy Roosevelt is credited as saying this. He says, "Nothing in the world is worth having or worth doing unless it means effort, pain, and difficulty." He says, "I have never in my life envied a human being who led an easy life." Now think about that. Many of us would look at someone who they got it made, they live on the beach, they have an easy life. Maybe we'd envy that. Teddy Roosevelt said, no, I would never envy that person. I would envy the person who led a difficult life, but led them well. Because he knew that doing these hard things is what really made a person great. And again, if you read his history, his story, he battled, lots of childhood ailments, and, for a time they thought he wouldn't even walk, probably wouldn't even live. But he battled through that by doing lots of outdoor things, and he was with the Rough Riders, and he had these huge ranches out west, and he did hard things. He did hard things, and it made him a better man, made him a better president, made him a better person for it and through it. C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite writers, said hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny. So how do we do these hard things? How do we teach our children, our grandchildren? Maybe sometimes we have to teach our employees, because you're going to get employees that probably have a bit of a comfort crisis in their life. If you're hiring very many people, you're going to come across those folks. How do we do this? Well, I think part of it is physically. We need to challenge them to do physically hard things. And again, in the book, Michael Easterly talks about, doing these, I can't remember what he calls them, but these big physical challenges. I kind of read that and I'm like, yeah, I don't. 20, 30 years ago, I might have been interested in that, but I'm not sure now. But there's still hard things that we can challenge ourselves. Exercise, working out, going for walks instead of, watching the TV show. Just encourage your children, grandchildren, employees, yourself to physically do some harder things. And then mentally as well. Challenge yourself with mental problems, mental puzzles, mental whatever. As a founder, you're always mentally wrestling with something, trying to find a solution, and that's great. And we just do it because that's how we've always done it. But a lot of people don't. When they're, at the end of the day, their mind just checks out. And we need to encourage people to continue thinking, mentally doing hard things. And I think emotionally as well. Sometimes we have to emotionally do hard things because, when it comes to, having, relationships with other people and keeping our emotions in check, if we haven't exercised that part of our being as well, then we're not going to be prepared when the time comes when you have to go through emotionally difficult times. And then I threw this one in there because I think that, as a business owner, as a farmer with employees, you're always going to have relationships. And I didn't know quite how to put this. I said relationally, but a lot of this is going to come down to employees. You're going to have to do some hard things sometimes with employees. And I know that one of the biggest mistakes that we made as we grew Green Cover over the last 16 years, from essentially just my brother and I and a few of our kids to now having 60 employees. One of the biggest mistakes we made early on was we had a very poor. Well, I had to take that back. We did not have a hiring process. If you walked in and you had a pulse and we had work to do, you're probably going to get hired. And that was about the extent of the hiring process. And we got some good people and we got some lemons. And the problem is we weren't prepared to do the hard things of saying, you know what, if you can't do this, and this, then there's no place for you here. And instead we kind of tried to ignore it. We'd move them to a different position. Well, maybe they do a better job if they're over in this area. No, they didn't. And so we had people that we kept on far too long because we weren't prepared to relationally do the hard thing. And the hard thing is that some of these people were folks that we went to church with, people that were friends from before. And now we're saying, we're going to fire you because you're not a good fit for our organization? That's hard. And we ended up doing it, but we did it a year and a few months too late. Now, there wasn't any permanent damage, but it wasn't fair to the rest of my employees, and it wasn't fair to that employee either, because they were stuck in a job where they had no joy doing it, they weren't growing, and we were keeping them from other opportunities where they would be a better fit. And so we had to learn that early on, is that if you got somebody that's not a good fit, you need to address it early, and you need to do the hard things sometimes and let them go. For their own good, for your good, for the good of your company. And so sometimes it's just difficult because we would much rather just be comfortable in those relationships and just ignore that. But that doesn't do anybody any good. So you got to do the hard things if you're truly going to be that innovator. Number 4, the risk versus reward, not understanding risk versus reward. I think that the solution here is that we have to understand courage versus caution. And I like the thought of this because, Mark Twain says, courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear. It's not the absence of fear. Just because you're courageous doesn't mean you're not afraid, but it means you're willing to go into the battle anyway. Aristotle, and this is kind of paraphrased from the Greek, I suppose, but he says, courage sits between recklessness and cowardice. That's where courage sits. And caution plays a role in finding that sweet spot. And I don't think Aristotle probably said sweet spot. That's part of the paraphrase. But think about that. You've got being completely reckless over here, and you've got being a coward over here and not wanting to do anything. And courage is somewhere in between, doing the appropriate thing at the appropriate time in the appropriate manner. And caution is going to be part of what helps you find that. Caution is going to keep us from doing the really stupid things. Caution is what's going to prevent us from betting the entire company on something that we're not sure about, but courage is going to say we're going to bet a part of it because it's that 10x chance of something giving us a 100-fold response. And so we need to understand when we need to have the courage and then how to mediate that with caution. And so for farmers, as I think about this, as we're trying to sell cover crops to farmers, I think, and we farm too, so I just put myself in their place. For farmers, the risk of trying something new, and anytime you're going to try something new, it is a risk. Let's not kid ourselves. That's going to be a risk. Sometimes it's a financial risk. For some of them, it's a social risk. It's hard for us to imagine, my brother and I, because we don't really frequent the coffee shops in town, and the social pressure has never been a big deal to us because we have each other, and we have a group of people that are doing similar things that we're doing, and that's who we get our social time with. But for others, the social risk of trying something different, especially something really visible, like no-till or cover crops or something that is completely visible from the highway and might get you talked about at the coffee shop, that's a risk. And we have to understand that. So how can we offset that risk by helping them to try it at a small scale? Okay, it kind of goes back to that experimentation, but what are we doing as a company with our products, with our services? How do we help farmers be courageous by trying something new, but also doing it at an appropriate scale? That's the caution part of it, until they can see and they can determine whether or not it's going to work for themselves. And I think part of what we have to ask ourselves is, what are we willing and able to do to facilitate that? How do we help our customers be more innovative by helping to take on some of that risk ourselves? And I don't know. For us as Green Cover, we don't really offer, some people, these money-back guarantees and all these things. We didn't really feel like that was where we wanted to go. But what we're willing to do is we're willing to mix up lots of different seed mixes for 1 acre, 2 acres. We'll spend extra time in our own expense doing these very small, complicated mixes if you want to try 10 different things, on 2 acres each and have a 20-acre experimental plot. We're perfectly happy to do that. That's part of what we're going to do to help offset that risk. And so I think you ask yourselves that, as you're looking at moving your product or your services into the marketplace, what are you willing and what are you able to do to facilitate those things? And then finally, the fifth one, and this is probably one of the bigger ones. This is one of the more difficult ones as you look at how do we break free of the status quo, because the people who are benefiting from the system as it is don't want it to change. How do we break free of those people? How do we get out from under their influence? And it's not easy, and it's going to be more difficult in some segments than others, but basically you have to find the right people. You have to find the right people. You have to not be worried about the people who are benefiting from the status quo and don't want things to change, but you have to go out and find the right people to help you. And so I think there's several ways that you do this. Number one, you got to have your own personal team. You got to have your own support system, your own support network. And I like to show this picture here. This is a very recent picture. So the 2 girls in the front there in the basketball uniforms, that's 2 of my 3 daughters are still at home. We have 7 children. 3 of them are still at home. We homeschool, and so we've got a homeschool basketball team. And they are not good. I'll just tell you that. And so the girl on your left, Anna Hope, she's a senior this year. She's never played a sport in her life. She's not athletic. But you know what? She said, I want to play basketball this year because I want to have a chance to play a sport with my sister before I graduate. And she was terrible. She had a great attitude. She just didn't, she had no experience. But you know what? Those other girls on that team, they just loved her, and she loved them. And this picture is from one of their tournaments. And so the other girl, Tally, she's on the junior high team. She's a little better. She's not very tall, lots to learn, okay? They just weren't very good. But this picture shows everybody in my family that came to watch them, paid money to come and watch them play terrible basketball. They weren't there to see good basketball. They were there to see their family. That's what we need. That's what you need in your life. You need that personal support system. People that they're not all that interested necessarily in the products that you're making, the services that you're rolling out, but they're there to support you because they love you. They care for you. They want to see you succeed. They're not necessarily going to be helpful in the technical part of your success, but they're going to be there to support you and to encourage you and to give you that motivation to keep going. And so I hope you have something like that in your life. I hope you have a good church. I hope you have a good family, good friends that can support you as you go through this walk, because it's not easy. It's not easy being the innovator, the inventor, the founder, so you have to have that personal support system. Number two, you got to have your professional team. So as you build your company, you're going to have to hire people. And I talked a little bit earlier about, the lack of our hiring process. We've got a much better hiring process now. And so this is our team, very colorful. We have to wear high vis because we have forklifts and heavy equipment running all over the place. So, so we have multiple colors of high vis. We've got pink if you want it, yellow, green. But this is our team. This is just at our Bladen operation. And so Bladen, Nebraska is a little town of about 200 people. And we employ about 35 people in a town of 200. Now, they don't all live there in Bladen, but some of them do. Some of them live in all these surrounding communities. And it's hard to get good people, especially when, we're competing against the big co-ops in the area, the other big companies. We can't compete with them on the basis, we can compete with them on salary, but not on benefits. But they have no chance of competing with us on culture and on flexibility and on the attitudes that people have in working there. And in the values that we share, with our shared value of wanting to help people regenerate God's creation for future generations. They can't say that. And so what happens is we tend to get the people who resonate with our values and with our culture and with our mission because we're very specific about what that mission and culture and values are. And we're starting to hire and fire around them. And I wish we'd have known that earlier. We'd have had a much better team earlier on. And so I'm very thankful for the people that we have. And they come and go. People move in, people move out. But your culture and your values have to remain steady because that's what's going to determine the people on your team. So I hope that you are able to find the right professional team and find people that are willing to challenge that status quo. They don't all have to be innovators, but they all have to have that attitude of, let's do something new. Let's do something different. I want to be part of something different. Number three, your customers. I've been talking this whole time about a lot of this is going to apply to your customers. How can you help them be more innovative in their mindsets? And part of that is you have to go to them. You have to go find where they are. So early on, when we started Green Cover, we just went to where they were. We didn't know what else to do. We didn't have Dan Schultz to tell us how to market ourselves. So we just had to go to where they were. So we went to things like No Till in the Plains, Practical Farmers of Iowa, because we knew that the people there would have the right mindset. I yesterday in the little panel that we did at the hotel, somebody asked about the geography or how did we try to find customers, and I said we look for people with a mindset and not necessarily in a targeted geography, because the mindset is what we need. And so people who are going to these no-till events or these soil health events, those are our people. And that's where we need to be. And so as you build your own businesses, as you are trying to find the customers, as you get your products developed into the market, you got to go to where the customers are. And so you got to start looking at these trade shows. And I would not wait until you have a product to sell to start doing this. Start going there now to start learning who your customers are. Get into their heads, understand their problems, have conversations with them. If you wait till you have a product to sell, it's too late. You got to start doing that research. You have to start understanding who your people are ahead of time. So we go to these events, but we also spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort putting on our own events, because now we have 100% control over what happens. And we can target the people that we want to come in when we have our own event. So this is a picture from our summer field day. We'll have a summer field day in August, and we generally will have 300 people come in. Some of them, most of them are probably our customers, but we always have probably 30% that haven't bought seed from us before. And maybe they won't. Maybe they're just there to learn. Maybe they're there to just check things out. That's okay. But we want them there. We want to get them on our turf. We want to show them what our products can do. We want to show them what the system can do. So that's one of the things that we do. We also do some high-level events. We call these the Regenerative Nexus Summits. Very high-level events. We're teaching at much higher levels. And this is a specific invite only, so we're targeting some of the best customers and the people that we want to be our customers. We're specifically finding them and inviting them and encouraging them to come to this because we want them to see what we have to offer, but we also want to connect them with other people who are using our products that are having success, because that's the best way to sell it, is not for me to say how great this is, it's for my customer to tell a new person how great it was. That's ultimately what you want. And if you can figure out a way to do that, that's awesome. I say we put on our own events to do that. And in fact, if you want to come, we are putting on an event in June. Nicole Masters, some of you have heard of her. She's a world-renowned soil biologist from New Zealand. She'll be at our farm June 3rd and 4th. And we're going to be doing a 2-day, very intense, we're calling it Nexus in the Field, digging deeper, better profitability with soil biology. So that's a problem we're trying to solve, help farmers solve, is there's not enough profitability because we don't have good enough biology in our soils anymore. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And so we put a lot of time and effort into that. We also know that many of our customers are on social media. They're on YouTube. So we spend more of our resources on YouTube than anywhere else. We've got almost 18,000 followers now on YouTube. We've got 400 videos on there. But that didn't happen overnight. That started with one video and one follower. And we've just built and we built and we've worked. We worked hard at it, but it's paid off because now when people want to learn stuff, they can go to our YouTube channel and they can find all kinds of things on there. And we've got other people saying, hey, go to Green Cover's YouTube channel because they've got this great webinar series with Dr. Christine Jones. You've just got to see that. It has nothing to do with cover crop seed, but they're there and we're influencing them and we're going to where our customers are. And then lastly on this one, we have a newsletter, and I would encourage you to start building your email lists, founders, as you start building this. Even if you don't have a product yet, start recruiting people to be on your email list. This is one of our most valuable assets, we feel. We've got 45,000 people on our list we send this newsletter out to every other week, and we have a 50% open rate. And if you're a marketing person in the room, you know those are pretty good numbers. Those are pretty good numbers. But again, it didn't start there. It started with just a handful. And it's grown and it's grown. But we did that by going to where our customers were. We did that by looking for the right people. We didn't look for the people who were satisfied with the status quo. We looked for people who wanted to change. And then finally, your external network. That's the right people. You need to build this external network. King Solomon in Proverbs 15 says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. You need some outside input as well. And the value of outside external networks are going to be you can get better perspective. Sometimes we're so involved in our own business, we don't have good perspective. And I like this little graphic here because it depends on which way you're looking at that. Both of those truths are right. Both of those things are true. It just depends on which way you're looking at it. And so you probably are only looking at most of your problems in one direction. Do you have others that can bring additional perspective to help you solve those problems, to help you see things in different ways? I think one of our weakest issues, one of our biggest problems with Green Cover, we are not completely dominated, but we have a lot of family members working for us. I've got 2 of my kids. My brother has 2 kids and a son-in-law. And there's great things about that, but there's also some challenges because we don't have enough outside perspective, enough outside experience because we built so much internally. I feel like we're lacking some of that outside perspective. And so we need to do some work to get some of that. You can also really help get some experience. You can't always afford to gain all the experience you need before you need it. Sometimes you have to borrow some. And that's why you need outside advisors. You need outside perspectives helping you with some of the experiences that they've had, some of the mistakes that they've made. This is all about getting the right people into your life, into your business, into your company, so that you can succeed. Now, LinkedIn, they built an empire on this concept of making these connections, of helping you build that external network, and that's great. And as you build these external networks, it's great to meet people on LinkedIn, but there's no substitute for being at places like this and actually meeting people in person. So, just as we close here, the types of external networks that we have really informal ones. So like what you're doing right here, I would consider this an informal external network. It's great. You're meeting people, you're sharing ideas, you're exchanging business cards. I've got several in my pocket here. There's a lot of connectedness that is happening here. I had a conversation, with John Jackson with Global Neighbor, and he was, telling me, they're using these wavelengths of light to either kill seed or stimulate seed. And I said, well, hey, have you talked to Bob Jones? He's not that far from you. He's using different wavelengths of light in his vegetable farm to get different colors, get different flavors, get different tastes in the vegetables that they're growing. He's like, no, I've never heard of that guy. So I'm going to connect them. And that all happened because we were both at this kind of informal networking event. There's the ad hoc type. We've done some of this. We have a particular problem we try to solve. We identify 3 or 4 experts. We pay them. We bring them in for a day. We kind of have a think tank around that particular problem. We really work hard at it. And then when we're done, and we thank them, we pay them, and they go on their way. It's not a standing committee, but it's people that we bring in if we want to troubleshoot something in particular. That can be very effective. You may need that, you may not, but that's certainly an option. And then there's much more formal and regular type advisory boards, advisory councils. The nonprofit worlds are really good at this, so I'm on the board of the Soil and Water Conservation Society. We meet every month for an hour and a half, and we just give advice, we give counsel, we help set direction for that organization. Do you have something like that in your own company? The question was asked yesterday to the founders that were there, how many people had some sort of farmer advisory committee, and there were only 3 or 4 people that raised their hand. Everybody needs something like that, whether it's really formal or kind of ad hoc or a fairly informal thing. It's kind of up to you. And then finally, look at where you can make synergistic collaborations. And what I mean by that is when you find other companies, and as I look around this room, I see companies that go, okay, this and this, they don't compete, but they really fit well together. You guys could do a couple things together. You could do an event, you could do an education, you could do a training together and benefit both of your audiences. You probably would share many of the same customers. And so we've done a number of these things. Just several weeks ago I was in Indiana, and we did an event with John Kemp in Advancing Eco Ag, AEA, and then also Rick Clark in his Farm Green Consulting. So the 3 of us got together and we did this event because we all share very similar mindsets, similar values, and many of the same customers. It just made sense. Let's get together, let's do this, let's share our resources. We all advertised it, had a good turnout. It was a great event, but none of us had to work nearly as hard as we would have if we'd have done it by ourselves. So look for these synergistic collaborations with companies that you would share a lot of things in common with, but your products or your services don't overlap to where you would be competitors. So, innovation, if we're really going to be innovative, both individually within our team, within our customers, and then hopefully help our society to become more innovative as well, we need to cut all those tethers and implement these things that we just talked about. And we do that status quo just goes away. And then we can really start to see things change. And my hope for you is that you see the status quo just fade away in your own little micro worlds, but that we see that, in agriculture as well. I see, from what they were saying up here earlier, there's a lot of hope. There is a lot of optimism of things that are going to change. There's some exciting technologies out there, and I'm really excited about what this group is doing to support this group of founders, and hats off to the farmers that are supporting and driving so much of this as well. So here's my contact information. Be happy to chat with you, to visit with you about any of this information. If you call me, that will probably go through to my assistant, and she can line up a time for us to chat. Otherwise, just shoot me an email, and be happy to get together with you at some point. So thank you so much for your attention, and best of luck in the future.